I have gathered here before me the world's deadliest assassins, and yet each of you has failed to kill Austin Powers. That makes me angry, and when Dr. Evil gets angry, Mr. Bigglesworth gets upset. And when Mr. Bigglesworth gets upset, people die! Why must I be surrounded by frickin' idiots?
Welcome back to the Monday Morning Point Guard podcast. On this episode, going to be discussing a very controversial topic. Should the Lakers consider trading LeBron? It sounds like a pretty crazy statement, and ultimately I don't expect it to happen, but it's fun to discuss, and I at least want to lay out the case for a scenario in which they should trade LeBron. If you did enjoy the video, please be sure to like it as well as subscribe for weekly content. Also, the podcasts are now up on Spotify, so you can listen to the full episode uninterrupted there. And if there's a spot you agree with, disagree with, either reach out to us on Twitter or in that comment section, and we'd love to discuss with you. What an absolute train wreck of a season for the Lakers. And I think even going into the year, if you were feeling pessimistic about this group's title hopes, I doubt anyone would have imagined that they wouldn't be at least making the play-in, especially if you had told them that LeBron James was going to be in the mix for the scoring title. If this just has to be the most disappointing team in the history of the NBA. I just can't think of any team in my lifetime that would be able to supplant them for that. I guess the candidates here, just off the top of my head, we have the 99 Rockets with Barkley, Pippen, and Hakeem, the 04 Lakers with Kobe, Shaq, Gary Payton, Karl Malone, and then you have the Kobe, Dwight Nash Lakers in 2013. And all of those teams that I just mentioned made the playoffs under the old format where only the top 8 made it. And in the case of the 2004 Lakers, they actually made it to the finals. So for a team that has recently won a title, who entered the season as one of the title favorites, I would say, for them to finish in the bottom 10 of the league, they have to be the most disappointing team. Their resume just doesn't stack up to the other teams being considered for that most disappointing team label. And as far as who is to blame, it appears that Frank Vogel and Russell Westbrook are going to be the guys to fall on the sword here. And while they are partly to blame, I'm not sure that they're the main culprits here, but there is plenty of blame to go around here. For the Frank Vogel piece, I'm not going to sit here and say that Vogel did a good job because he absolutely did not, but I'm not sure that any coach in the league or in the history of the league could have done much more with this team. Sure, he could have staggered the LeBron and Russell Westbrook minutes a little bit more, but for the people who were calling for them to just outright bench Russell Westbrook, who would you have benched him for? There just wasn't enough on the roster. Would you have benched him for Avery Bradley or Wayne Ellington? There really just wasn't an option to go to outside of just sticking with Russell Westbrook, unfortunately. And that's not even getting into the fact that Vogel as a coach is someone who really hangs his hat on defense, and you gave him a roster completely devoid of any good defensive players outside of Anthony Davis. So what was Vogel supposed to do here? How much can we really blame him for an old and poorly put together roster? If you get rid of Vogel at the start of the year and replace him with Fizdale and a system on that roster, or even hell, Greg Popovich, how much better would they have really been? Maybe with Pop, they'd make the plan, but that's a marginal improvement at best. Coaching probably wasn't even in the top 10 of issues for them this season. For the Russell Westbrook side of things, he has also been bad, but like Vogel, I'm not sure how much you can really pin on him for the Lakers' woes. I talked about a couple weeks ago how the Lakers might be his last stop in his career. So I'm going to link that podcast in the description if you want to check out a little bit more on him. But as far as the blame goes, sure, he could have done more to fit in here, but that's just never been who he is as a player. He's always played the way that he's played, and he's not going to change for anyone. And why at age 33 did anyone expect that was going to change, that he was going to all of a sudden morph his game into being more of a team player? That just doesn't make sense. And it was a bad decision, and it was a bad fit when they brought him in. So even if you were to just Thanos snap him off the roster, does that even make this team much better? Does it make it better? Does it make them better at all? The real issue with Russ is just what it cost them to bring him in. It cost the Lakers basically all of their depth and all of their flexibility to improve the roster at the trade deadline and beyond that. Anthony Davis is a guy who I think deserves a lot of the blame, maybe not for this season in terms of a small picture, but the macro picture of where this team is at. I think a lot of the blame can be laid at his feet. And I talked about this on a previous podcast as well, so I'll also link that one down in the description. But just quickly, it's hard to blame Anthony Davis for being hurt, and he is injury prone. That's just the way it is. But even when he was out there this year, it just didn't look great. It just wasn't good enough, especially for a guy the Lakers mortgaged their entire future to get. The original plan here couldn't have been to pin all their hopes on year 19 version of LeBron. The plan was for Davis to take the torch as the franchise player, but it never happened, and it's not looking like it's ever going to happen. And for the LeBron piece of the blame pie, it would be really hard to blame LeBron, the player, for what has happened this season. In year 19, he's in the running for the scoring title, playing point guard on offense and center on defense. That's just insane. But LeBron, the GM, is another story entirely. The disaster that was the decision to trade for Russell Westbrook versus Buddy Hield just cannot be understated. Obviously, Russell Westbrook is a better talent-wise than Buddy Hield, but fit-wise, Hield is exactly the guy that you would want to pair alongside LeBron, and salary-wise, he's on an affordable and front-loaded contract. So even if things didn't work out with Hield, he would have been much easier to move off of. Also, I think you would have been able to keep Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, who's a decent role player at worst, and maybe you could have re-signed Caruso if you had gone with the Hield deal. So that's 3 good fits for your team that you gave up to get one bad fit and Russell Westbrook. And I know at some point there's going to be some article or some rumor that LeBron didn't push for the Lakers to get Russell Westbrook, or he wasn't involved in the GMing side at all, or at least that decision. But I'm not convinced. I really just think he's trying to distance himself from this mess. The Russell Westbrook acquisition just has LeBron's name written all over it. And he admitted in an interview earlier in the year that he had a big hand in assembling this team.
What's up, Brian?
What's up, BT?
Welcome back, man.
Man, appreciate it.
How important was it for you, AD, and Jared to try to help put this team together? And what are the conversations been like with Russ on how he should fit in, how he should play his game?
Well, it was exciting, helping put this team together this summer, understanding what I felt and we all felt that was going to help us be a title contending team.
There was a rumor that prior to trading for Russell Westbrook, DeMar DeRozan was heading to the Lakers on something like a 1-year, $9 million deal. But I have a couple of thoughts about that. I really doubt that DeMar would have turned down a 3-year, $83 million deal from the Bulls for that 1-year deal with the Lakers. He said he expected to go to LA, but the Bulls deal kind of came out of nowhere. We weren't really expecting that. And it's easy to say that you were planning on signing with the Lakers after you signed a much more lucrative deal with the Bulls. Also, play-wise, I just have serious doubts that he would have been this level of player for the Lakers. Other perimeter players have really struggled to fit with LeBron, and DeRozan isn't exactly a sharpshooter on the perimeter. So fit-wise, it might not have looked great. I think it would have been an improvement on Westbrook, sure, but I don't think it would have been an ideal fit. DeMar DeRozan needs the ball in his hands to do his thing, and we just haven't seen LeBron play off-ball enough throughout his career to make something like that work. I think it's really naive of Laker fans to criticize the team for the DeMar DeRozan thing. I don't think he would have signed in LA with that Bulls offer on the table. And also, I really doubt you're getting the all-NBA version of DeMar DeRozan on this weird Lakers team. I think that GM Rob Pelinka is also a likely casualty of this Lakers disaster, and I do feel for him. This Lakers GM job is really tough. You have a really hands-on owner in Jeannie Buss, and you have to contend with Le GM acting as an unofficial co-GM. And that being said, like Vogel, he hasn't exactly done a good job here. With such a top-heavy roster, it was going to be really important for him to find those undrafted G League diamonds in the rough type guys, and he just hasn't done that. Sure, Austin Reeves is pretty solid, but they really needed to get a lot more of those players, and I just don't think that Pelinka going forward is going to be the man for that job. Anybody could sign big free agents or trade the farm for star players when you're the Los Angeles Lakers, but finding those undervalued guys is really key, like the Spurs did all those years, or the Heat did with their current roster. Even the Suns finding a guy like Campaign and getting a lot of value out of somebody like Bismack Biyombo, it really speaks volumes to that. Pelinka just really hasn't found those guys, and I think just in general, he really misinterpreted the lesson that they learned from that bubble title. That group had a defensive and physical identity. And what is the identity of this current Lakers team? Old, pouty? I really couldn't tell you what it is. And you can't pin that on LeBron for not rounding out the roster on the fringes. So Pelinka deserves quite a bit of the blame. Looking ahead to the offseason, LeBron is on the last year of his deal and is going to have a lot less loyalty towards the Lakers as a franchise than he did with the Heat, who helped him to his first title, and then obviously also his hometown Cavaliers. So if things are looking really bleak, or as bleak as they do now, there's a very real chance he just walks out the door for nothing. Thus, the Lakers have to make some moves that are really going to change the destiny of this team. And you might be saying that, well, it isn't all bad here. The Lakers are going to get a solid draft pick in this year's draft to either bring in some much needed youth or flip that pick for a veteran to help them out. But sadly, the Lakers sent this year's pick to the Pelicans in that Anthony Davis trade, so that's off the table. You might also say, well, most of the roster from this past season are now going to be free agents, so they can fill things out through free agency, and they have tons of open roster spots. But you would also be wrong. I'm going to assume that Kendrick Nunn is taking his $5 million player option since he didn't play this season, and wouldn't likely get nearly that in the free agent market. And also, there's just going to be no chance that Russell Westbrook isn't taking that $48 million option, just no chance at all. And so with those two assumptions, that already puts the Lakers over the luxury tax, not just the salary cap, but the luxury tax for next season with 5 players on the roster. That means you're basically just going to have to roll the dice out there with a bunch of league minimum guys, which doesn't seem like a real solution. Trade Russell Westbrook seems like a really easy fix, but as I discussed in the podcast on how this might be the last stop in his career, there just isn't a long list of teams who are going to be interested in acquiring him. For the Lakers, is trading for an injury-prone John Wall who hasn't played in 2 seasons while giving up your 2027 first-round pick, is that going to be worth it? I really don't think so. I think in that case, you would probably just be better off buying out Russell Westbrook than giving up that pick for another ill-suited player to play alongside LeBron James and John Wall. Then there is a desperate version of the Knicks if that ends up existing this offseason, but I still think that that's a long shot. I've also heard some rumors that the Hornets are interested, but I can't imagine why they would be. It would have to be, for the trade, it would have to be Gordon Hayward and either Terry Rozier or Mason Plumlee and Kelly Oubre. And to me, that just reeks of the Lakers just throwing that out there and trying to get some other teams interested in making a deal for Russ, just desperate to get any buzz going for him. I guess maybe the Hornets are looking to unload some of those long-term contracts, specifically Terry Rozier, but I really can't imagine the case for bringing in a ball-dominant player like Russell Westbrook to take the ball out of LaMelo Ball's hands. I just think there are better ways to get off of the Hayward and Rozier contracts if you're really desperate to do that. So trading Russell Westbrook might not be an option, or at the very least, not an option that's going to improve the team enough to move them back into title contention. Taylor Horton-Tucker, I almost don't even want to mention, because we know based on the trade deadline, no one views him as an asset. So you're not likely moving him for anything substantial, even if you pair him with that draft pick. That pretty much leaves Anthony Davis. And while you could get a good haul for AD, value-wise, his value is still going to be somewhat diminished based on the injury history and the fact that he missed a ton of games this year. And regardless of even that, are you really going to be able to get a deal that's going to improve your chances at a title over what you would have in Anthony Davis? I've heard maybe the Bulls as a landing spot for him in a potential Davis trade, but either acquiring Nikola Vucevic or Zach LaVine in the case that the Bulls don't want to max LaVine, neither of those guys are going to give you better title odds than what you would have with a healthy Anthony Davis. Let's say the Suns don't want to bring back DeAndre Ayton and you do some type of sign and trade for him. That's a great return for a player like Anthony Davis, but it's not going to help your chances for next season specifically. So I guess you could go with the trade that is the equivalent of asking for change at the gas station and some type of 4 quarters for the dollar type deal for Anthony Davis just to round out the roster. But with LeBron James in his 20th season, can you really ask him to continue to carry a franchise for 82 games plus playoffs? I really don't think so. He can still carry a team in spots, but not on a nightly basis for a team that has title aspirations. Someone is going to need to lighten the load for him. So to me, it just seems like the Lakers are screwed. I just don't see a path forward for them that is going to improve the roster enough to make them a title contender, which is ultimately what they're going to need to possibly re-sign LeBron James. And so that gets me to the title of the video. Should the Lakers at least consider trading LeBron? Now, like I mentioned, I don't expect this to happen, but I think it's really interesting to think about at least, and I want to try to make the case for it. The Lakers are really moving rapidly towards this doomsday scenario, especially if LeBron walks out the door for nothing. LeBron leaving would mean that Anthony Davis is basically the only competent player on the roster, and he's going to be asked to carry this franchise and this team. How successful can you really expect to be with that being the case? Also, if they do suck with Anthony Davis as the sole player there, you might say, well, they could get some high draft picks and maybe they get lucky in the lottery, but they don't have draft picks for the next 5-ish or so years on the back of acquiring Anthony Davis. So that, I think, puts you at minimum likely a decade away from being able to compete for anything again. So hitting the reset button this offseason and trying to capitalize on the value of LeBron and Anthony Davis might not be the worst decision, since as constructed, if you're not able to really make some serious changes to this team, you really have no hope at competing for a title next season. And based on that, you likely have no chance at bringing back LeBron James. And even if you were able to swindle him or Jedi mind trick him into re-signing, how many more years is he really going to play? So maybe you might say you want to sign another star in place of LeBron in the scenario that he walks. But are there going to be any star players fighting to hitch their wagon to Anthony Davis? I really doubt it at this stage. So given you're entering a rebuild anyways, why not pull the plug on this early and get the most value you can back for your rebuild rather than waiting 1 year and having another disappointing season and be in a far worse position? Obviously, if you trade LeBron, I'm also making the case that you should trade Anthony Davis. I just don't see a scenario that you should keep. If you do trade LeBron, there's no reason to keep Anthony Davis. So trading both of those guys would really allow you to get some young assets back in here and reload the coverage with some draft picks so that your rebuild could be like a decade maximum versus a decade minimum in terms of becoming a competitive team again. I think in the worst case scenario, if you hit the reset button this offseason, you'd be the worst case scenario about a decade away versus if you wait an offseason and LeBron leaves for nothing, I think at minimum you're a decade away. And we have seen what type of crazy trade package you can get for Anthony Davis. And I think it would be slightly less now, but I still think it would be substantial. He is only 29 after all. It feels like he's 35, but he's somehow only 29. And the LeBron trade, or at least the potential LeBron trade, is less easy to quantify. His age, as crazy as it sounds, actually wouldn't matter that much in a deal like this, but it's more because of his contract. I think if you were a team looking to acquire him and the Lakers looking to ship him out, you're basically just got to view it through the lens of it being a 1-year rental. And that starts to sound a lot like the Kawhi Leonard to Toronto deal. The Raptors knew Kawhi wasn't likely to re-sign there, so it was really just a move to push the chips in, and win that one title, just get over the hump for that 1 year. And for the Kawhi trade, just as a reminder, it was Kawhi and Danny Green for DeMar DeRozan, Jakob Poeltl, and a 2019 top 20 protected pick. So let's play really conservatively with this. And if we're making a LeBron trade, let's replace DeMar DeRozan in that top 20 protected pick with 2 first-round picks and 2 swaps. I think you could likely get more, but we'll just play it on the safe side and say that's all they get. So for LeBron, you would also have to pair it with a salary dump, but you could bring in a promising young player like Jakob Poeltl was at the time, and then 2 picks and 2 swaps. And I think if you traded Anthony Davis, you would also have to do some salary dump type move, but you could also bring back another promising young player and 2 to 3 picks with 2 to 3 swaps. I think finding someone willing to trade for Anthony Davis wouldn't be too difficult, and finding someone to cash in some assets for 1 year of LeBron James might be a little bit harder, but I still think it's doable. The Knicks come to mind off the top of my head. They are desperate for a star player, and they have a few young, promising players and some tradable contracts that could get you to the salary figure of a LeBron James or an Anthony Davis. And they still have tons of draft picks, some of which are still left over from that Kristaps Porzingis deal. There's also the Nets, who might want to swap Ben Simmons for LeBron James with some of those draft picks they got from Philly for Harden. Probably not, but maybe. And I wouldn't put it past the Raptors to do something crazy again. They have a really solid, deep roster that if you added a star to like LeBron could result in a title. It looks very similar talent-wise and makeup-wise to the Kawhi Leonard Raptors. So I think they could be in the running for that. My point is, I feel like there are tons of teams who feel like they're just one player away or one star away from being a real title contender. And a few of them have some assets that they could spare and that could be really interested in a LeBron rental. As fun as this is to talk about, I really doubt it ever happens. The Lakers, though, just in general, seem to be really stuck in terms of where they're at as a franchise. But who knows regarding LeBron? Crazy things happen in the NBA every year.